Imagine looking through reconnaissance photos and seeing thousands of soldiers preparing for war. Hundreds of tanks, endless military camps, convoys stretching for miles, fighter aircraft lined up on airfields. Everything pointed to one conclusion. The largest invasion in history was about to begin. There was only one problem. Almost none of it was real. The tanks were inflatable. The airplanes were made of rubber. Many of the camps were empty. The radio traffic was fake. Even the army itself barely existed. Yet Adolf Hitler believed every single detail. And that mistake helped change the course of World War II. This is the incredible true story of the army that never existed. June 1944.
Hundreds of tanks.
Southern England.
Formation.
By the summer of 1944, Europe had been under Nazi control for years. The Allies knew that defeating Germany would require one enormous gamble. They had to cross the English Channel and invade France. It would become the largest amphibious invasion in human history. More than 150,000 soldiers would land on the beaches of Normandy in a single day. But there was a terrifying reality. If Germany knew exactly where the invasion would happen, the beaches could become a death trap. Machine guns, artillery, minefields, concrete bunkers, thousands of experienced German soldiers. Military planners estimated that a failed invasion could cost tens of thousands of lives in just a few hours. The success of the entire operation depended on one thing: surprise. But surprising Hitler would be far more difficult than defeating him. Berlin German High Command Hitler wasn't waiting blindly. He knew an invasion was coming. The only question was where. His generals studied every possible landing site along the French coast. Normandy, Brittany, the Pas-de-Calais, Belgium, every possibility was considered. But one location stood above all the others: the Pas-de-Calais. It was the shortest distance between Britain and France. From a military perspective, it seemed like the obvious choice. Hitler became convinced that this was where the Allies would strike. The Allies learned something incredibly valuable. They didn't need to invent a completely new story. They simply needed to reinforce the story Hitler already believed. And that became the foundation of one of history's greatest military deceptions. London. The plan that shouldn't have worked. Inside a series of heavily guarded offices, British planners asked a simple question. What if Germany could be convinced to defend the wrong battlefield? Not for a few hours, not for a single day, but for weeks. The answer wasn't another secret weapon. It wasn't a new aircraft. It wasn't a more powerful tank. It was an illusion so convincing that German reconnaissance pilots would photograph it. German spies would report it. German radio operators would hear it. And Hitler himself would trust it.
Ropes tight, applying camo.
To create that illusion, the Allies would build something the world had never seen before. An entire army. That existed only in the enemy's imagination. Part 2. Building the perfect illusion. A general who didn't exist where Germany thought he was. To make the deception believable, the Allies needed more than fake equipment. They needed a commander the Germans already respected. That man was General George S. Patton. Patton had earned a reputation as one of America's most aggressive and capable commanders. German intelligence admired him. In Hitler's eyes, if the Allies were planning their main invasion, Patton would surely be leading it. The Allies understood this perfectly. So instead of sending Patton where he would actually fight, they turned him into the centerpiece of a carefully crafted illusion. Every public appearance, every reported inspection, every supposed military visit was designed to reinforce one message: Patton was preparing to invade the Pas-de-Calais. Exactly where Hitler already expected the attack to come. An army begins to appear across southeastern England. Fields that had once been quiet began filling with military equipment. At least that's what German reconnaissance aircraft believed they were seeing. From thousands of feet in the air, long rows of armored vehicles stretched across the countryside. Tank battalions, artillery positions, fuel depots, repair workshops, supply dumps. Everything looked exactly like a massive invasion force preparing for battle. But if someone had walked through those camps, they would have discovered something astonishing. Many of the tanks weren't made of steel. They were inflatable. Constructed from rubber and canvas, they could be transported by just a few soldiers and inflated within minutes. From the sky, however, they cast realistic shadows. They reflected sunlight like real vehicles. Even their dimensions closely matched actual armored tanks. To a reconnaissance pilot flying hundreds or even thousands of meters above the ground, they looked completely authentic. Rubber, wood, and imagination. The deception didn't stop with tanks. Wooden aircraft appeared on temporary airfields. Fake landing craft crowded riverbanks. Canvas-covered trucks lined country roads. Some vehicles were built using little more than wood, fabric, and paint. Others consisted of inflatable frames carefully shaped to resemble real military equipment. Engineers even paid attention to tire tracks. Fresh tracks were deliberately created in muddy fields to make the camps appear active. Smoke rose from carefully placed field kitchens. Laundry hung outside tents. Empty fuel barrels were scattered around maintenance areas. Every tiny detail mattered. The goal wasn't perfection up close, it was credibility from a distance, because that's exactly how German reconnaissance gathered most of its information. The sound of an army visual deception alone wasn't enough. If Germany intercepted radio communications and heard silence, the illusion would collapse. So Allied radio operators began creating an invisible army. Day and night they transmitted thousands of messages, routine reports, supply requests, unit movements, weather updates, vehicle maintenance logs. Each transmission followed authentic military procedures. Each operator copied the communication style of real divisions. To German intelligence listening across the English Channel, it sounded like an enormous army preparing for invasion. They couldn't see the soldiers, but they could hear them. And every message strengthened the deception, the men who became actors. The soldiers involved in the operation quickly realized they had taken on an unusual role. They weren't just preparing for combat, they were performing. Convoys intentionally drove through villages where enemy agents were known to operate. Officers checked into hotels under carefully chosen names. Military vehicles appeared in one location during the morning and another by evening, creating the impression that even more units were arriving. Some troops were instructed to talk casually in pubs about future deployments, not because they expected anyone to believe them directly, but because rumors have a remarkable way of traveling, especially during wartime. The illusion wasn't built from one giant lie. It was built from thousands of believable details, each one harmless on its own. Together, they created an army that existed only inside the minds of Germany's intelligence officers, and soon, those officers would report exactly what the Allies wanted Hitler to hear. Thousands of Allied paratroopers descended into the French countryside. Hours later, the horizon filled with ships. More than 5,000 vessels crossed the English Channel. As dawn broke, landing craft headed toward 5 beaches that would become famous around the world: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. The largest amphibious invasion in history had begun. Fighting was brutal. Machine gun fire swept across the beaches. Artillery shells exploded among the landing craft. Many soldiers never made it beyond the shoreline. Yet despite the chaos, one thing became increasingly clear. Germany was hesitating. Hitler still believed the real invasion had not yet begun, waiting for the second attack throughout June 6th. And the days that followed, German commanders expected another much larger assault against the Pas de Calais. Because of that belief, several elite panzer divisions remained positioned away from Normandy. Those forces could have reinforced the beaches during the most critical hours of the invasion. Instead, they waited, day after day, for an army that didn't exist. Every hour of delay allowed the Allies to land more men, more tanks, more supplies, and more ammunition. Temporary beaches were constructed, harbors were assembled. Thousands of vehicles rolled inland. The foothold in France grew stronger. By the time German commanders fully realized that Normandy was the true invasion, the opportunity to push the Allies back into the sea had largely disappeared. The deception had achieved exactly what it was designed to accomplish. not by destroying enemy forces, but by controlling their decisions. The Ghost Army, many people remember the inflatable tanks. Few remember the people behind them. Artists, architects, engineers, radio specialists, set designers, sound technicians. Together with military personnel, they created one of the most convincing illusions in modern warfare. Some units used giant loudspeakers to broadcast recordings of tanks moving across roads, soldiers marching, and heavy equipment being unloaded. The sounds could travel for miles, to anyone listening from a distance. An entire army. Others specialized in visual deception. Within hours, empty fields could be transformed into realistic military camps. Fake headquarters, camouflaged vehicles, rows of tents. Everything designed to fool enemy eyes. It was an extraordinary combination of creativity and military strategy. And it worked. Better than almost anyone imagined. Part 4. The illusion that changed history. When the truth finally became clear. As the days passed, German commanders slowly began to understand the truth. Normandy was not a diversion. It was the invasion. By then it was too late. The Allies had secured beachheads along the French coast and were pouring thousands of soldiers, vehicles, and supplies into occupied Europe every single day. Roads that had once been under complete German control were now crowded with Allied convoys. Temporary harbors built from enormous floating structures allowed ships to unload around the clock. The invasion had survived its most dangerous hours, and every day that passed made an Allied victory more likely. The deception had bought something more valuable than territory. It had bought time. In war, time can be worth more than any weapon. More than inflatable tanks, people often imagine Operation Fortitude as nothing more than inflatable tanks scattered across the English countryside. The reality was far more sophisticated. It was a masterpiece of coordination. Double agents fed carefully crafted information back to Germany. Radio operators created the communications of divisions that didn't exist. Engineers built convincing decoys. Pilots flew missions designed to be seen. Every piece of the puzzle supported every other piece. If even one element had looked suspicious, the entire operation could have collapsed. Instead, each false clue reinforced the next. German intelligence wasn't fooled by a single lie. It was convinced by hundreds of believable details that all pointed toward the same conclusion. The greatest weapon was human psychology. Perhaps the most fascinating part of Operation Fortitude wasn't the fake equipment. It was the understanding of human nature. The Allies knew that people rarely question information that confirms what they already expect. Hitler believed the Pas de Calais was the logical place for an invasion. The deception simply gave him more reasons to trust that belief. Military historians often describe this as one of the greatest examples of confirmation bias ever used in warfare. The Allies didn't force Germany into making the wrong decision. They allowed Germany to convince itself. That subtle difference changed the course of the campaign. The legacy of Operation Fortitude. The success of D-Day depended on countless acts of courage. Soldiers who stormed the beaches, paratroopers who landed behind enemy lines, sailors who crossed dangerous waters, pilots who flew into enemy fire. But behind those acts of bravery stood another kind of battlefield. One fought with intelligence, deception, and imagination. Operation Fortitude proved that victory doesn't always belong to the side with the largest army or the most powerful weapons. Sometimes, it belongs to the side that better understands its enemy. Today, military academies around the world continue to study the operation. Not because of its inflatable tanks, but because it demonstrated how carefully planned deception can influence strategic decisions at the highest level. Its lessons are still discussed by military planners, intelligence agencies, and historians more than 80 years later. Final thoughts. History is often remembered through its battles. The explosions, the victories, the defeats, but behind nearly every famous battle is another story. A hidden story. A story of secret plans, impossible ideas, and ordinary people asked to do extraordinary things. Operation Fortitude reminds us that one of the most powerful armies of the Second World War was never meant to fight. Its mission was simply to be seen, and in doing so it helped open the door to the liberation of Western Europe. The soldiers on the beaches of Normandy showed incredible courage, but before they arrived, an army that never existed had already begun winning the battle. Closing. If this story surprised you, you're only beginning to uncover history's hidden side. Because behind every famous event lies another story that few people have ever heard. Here at Obscurum Atlas, we don't just tell history. We uncover the secrets hidden beneath it. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe and join us for the next chapter. Because sometimes, the greatest events in history were shaped by the things that never really existed.